Energy Media viewer Bruce Plante asks, if you were Premier of Alberta, what would you do differently than our current Premier when it comes to helping Alberta transition? Hey, I love this question, Bruce, because none of Alberta's policymakers and business leaders ever consider that the province's oil and gas industry could have a future different than its past. They all believe OPEC's forecasts, which show oil demand rising from 103 million barrels per day now to 120 million barrels per day in 2050. When Premier Danielle Smith says she wants to double oil production to 8 million barrels per day, she is repeating the OPEC view that we are entering the golden age of hydrocarbons. Well, I don't agree with that view. The assumptions behind OPEC's oil demand are already falling apart. The biggest miscalculation is that demand will fall in the global north because of electric vehicles, but growth in the global south will more than offset those losses. The problem is China. Not only is China rapidly electrifying its own economy, but it is aggressively exporting EVs to the rest of Asia, to Latin America, and to Africa. Chinese car companies are building EV factories all over the global south. The much more likely scenario, in my opinion, is the international agency's forecast that oil demand will peak in 2030 and begin declining before 2035. By 2050, only 57 million barrels per day of crude oil will be required. The IEA scenario is very bad news for Alberta. Now, the Smith government has a plan of sorts. 2 years ago, the UCP released the Emissions Reduction Responsible Energy Development Plan. Frankly, it's pretty weak. The focus is on decarbonizing oil and gas production at considerable expense and investing in a few clean energy sectors tied to hydrocarbons, like making blue hydrogen from natural gas. Well, I'd like to propose an alternate plan, one that is based on Energy Media's Canada 2050 strategy. The website is www.canada-2050.com. Canada 2050 has three simple parts. One, add value to Canada's natural resources. Two, electrify the extraction and processing of those resources. Three, build the infrastructure required to implement points one and two so that Canada can grow internally and internationally via ports on the west, east, and north coasts. So how does Alberta fit into that plan? 30 years ago, I supervised a team of economists developing an economic development strategy for a Canadian utility. Here's how the economists thought about the problem. Major industries like oil and gas are what they called growth poles that have three types of linkages that can be exploited. Forward, which is adding value to the raw resource. Backward, which is providing goods and services to the extraction of that resource. And technology developed within the growth pole that can be marketed to other industries. So if I was the Premier of Alberta, I'd put a team of very smart economists to work identifying all the backward, forward, and technology-based linkage opportunities where investment could be attracted and jobs created. That would be the basis for Alberta's new strategy. The plan to implement that strategy would be based upon modern industrial policy. Now, for a more detailed explanation of industrial policy, watch my April 18th interview with Professor Bentley Allen, an expert in the area. The basics of industrial policy is bringing together a wide range of stakeholders to advance development of strategic sectors using a wide range of policy tools. Many other modern countries have used this approach, including the United States with its Inflation Reduction Plan, and China with its aggressive support for clean energy manufacturing like solar panels, electric vehicles, and batteries. An important component of industrial policy is government leadership. Gone are the days when government played a passive role, facilitating the private sector and only becoming involved to correct market failures. Government must once again show leadership. Unlike the pre-1980 days, government doesn't do it alone. There is very much a partnership between the public and private sectors working with labor, civil society, and Indigenous communities. If I was Premier, the number one project on my list would be transitioning the oil sands from providing feedstock for American refineries to providing feedstock for an Alberta-based advanced materials manufacturing sector. So let me tell you a story. In September of 2023, I was reporting on the World Petroleum Congress in Calgary. I stumbled upon a technical session about using oil to make advanced materials. It was moderated by Dr. Ibrahim Abba, Saudi Arabia's VP of Saudi Aramco's VP of Technology. On the stage were three scientists. One of them was Dr. Paulo Bombin, a chemical engineer working for Alberta Innovates on its Bitumen Beyond Combustion program. More on Paulo and BBC in a minute. Dr. Abba said something in his opening remarks that I'll never forget. In addition to a global energy transition, he said, the world was also undergoing a materials transition. He said that more and more people in emerging economies were joining the middle class and they wanted consumer goods. Manufacturing all those goods in a sustainable way had created a revolution in the global materials industry. Now, this is where Paulo and BBC re-enter the story. Beginning in 2016, provincial agency Alberta Innovates began researching ways to turn oil sands bitumen into materials. I'm creating a series of videos about BBC, and I'll put the playlist link in the description. The upshot is that Alberta Innovates may be less than a year from having a commercial process to turn bitumen into carbon fiber precursor, which in turn would be used in Alberta-based carbon fiber manufacturing plants. But that's not all that can be done with bitumen. It can also be turned into asphalt binder for making roads and different types of graphite for making things like batteries. And this only scratches the surface. Paulo says that with more research, there's a host of materials that can be made with bitumen. Imagine a future in which global demand for transportation fuels declines after 2030. But Alberta is slowly building a bitumen-based advanced materials manufacturing sector that replaces U.S. demand with domestic demand. Not only will the jobs and business opportunities created by northern extraction remain, but an entirely new sector will create new, good-paying jobs and tax revenues to support public services. The best part? The Alberta government owns the intellectual property for the process to turn bitumen into carbon fiber. Imagine the leverage that could keep investment and jobs in the province instead of losing them to some U.S. state. And there's another big benefit that no one talks about, but we really should. Estimates for the cost of unfunded liabilities for the oil sands to clean up the massive tailings ponds and other operations range from $50 billion to $130 billion. Enormous numbers. If oil sands producers are squeezed out of business by the energy transition, who will reclaim the 9,000 square kilometers of sensitive land disturbed to create the oil sands? Alberta and Canadian taxpayers. That's who. Remember, bitumen beyond combustion is just one opportunity. There are many others. Identifying them all and working to diversify the Alberta economy is what I would do if I was Premier.